Welcome to the 28 Minutes of Sanity podcast. I'm JJ. Paul is with us today. We have a special guest who I'm going to introduce in just a second. But want to remind you, you can follow us on Twitter at 28min of sanity. Send us a comment or question, 28 minutes of sanity at gmail.com. Many of our viewers and listeners already know our guests today, but some of you don't. We're visiting with my friend Brett Kunkle. Brett, how are you doing?
I'm great, living out here in 75-degree summer weather here in Southern California.
All right. You actually led into one of my questions. You and I have worked together quite a bit over the decades now, and I used to play kind of a jokey game where I would try to get our kids to persuade you to move to Nebraska, knowing full well that there's no good reason to do that at that time. But the world has changed a lot, Brett, the last couple of years, and you can give a funny answer or a serious answer to this question, but like what is life like in California since March of 20? How does day-to-day life change? We hear things on the news and we don't know if it's everybody or if it's little pockets. What's life like on the West Coast right now?
Well, currently I'm recording from a bunker underneath my house.
All right.
And,
pretty bad, huh?
No, actually, I think there is this perception out there that California's nuts, and well, that's right, it is.
Yeah.
There are parts, particularly with our leadership in Sacramento, that are kind of nutty, and but it's pretty normal here. Really, you have maybe tighter lockdown stuff, more mask mandates. Things like that, but there are definitely pockets of resistance here. People who just are kind of blowing off some of this stuff, saying, "Hey, I think I'll listen to the lower magistrate versus that upper magistrate." So there's a lot of good people here, and so it's not as crazy as it often sounds on the news.
Right.
So we're experiencing general levels of freedom here.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that for your sake. So, hey, for our class, Brett, I have had to miss a couple of weeks, and so we've been playing the Greg Kunkle tactics video, and there's an introduction at the beginning of that. There's a guy that looks vaguely like you introducing Greg, and we're trying to figure, is that your son or your grandson in that video?
Man, we recorded that. I can't remember how many years ago that was, but yeah, that was a younger me.
Okay.
But this version of me is wiser.
Okay. So. I bet you are. I'm going to spring an ethics question on you, and then I'm just going to have you introduce yourself. But
I don't believe in ethics.
First, I knew that, but I need you to pretend for just a little bit here. If you did believe in ethics, would it be a sin to say, "Let's go, Brandon"? I want you to develop an answer to that question. I've actually had people ask me that. So how would you answer it?
Well, I would say that you'd have to look at kind of the intention,
right?
Because I think the words are the token, and the token in and of themselves may not be wrong. You can't simply point to a word and say that word is inherently wrong. We use that word to refer to a type or refer to something else, some other meaning. And so, the F word could have been something else. It could have been, whatever. Make up some word, but it's what it refers to and the meaning that it refers to.
Right.
So I think in the same way, that helps us to think through, okay, that phrase, "Let's go, Brandon," if someone has some intention there where, Scripture's instruction to us is not to use coarse language. It's to pay attention to the power of words and how the tongue can, the analogy in James is it can set things on fire. And so I think given that, looking at the intention and what the reference is, even though you're using the phrase, "Let's go, Brandon," for most people, their intention is to say blank Joe Biden.
Right.
And so given that and what that means, then I would say, yeah, that's not something, I think that would be something that Scripture would prohibit us from doing as Christians.
Right. The core command to honor the emperor, and then working backwards from that is that a fair summary?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because of the intention and the meaning behind this phrase and what it communicates, that seems to be at odds with honoring our leadership, not using coarse language, watching our tongues.
Right. Okay. Well, that is well thought out. How much time have you given to thinking about that question before I sprung it on you?
10 seconds.
That's impressive. All right.
I think it's a larger. I thought about the larger issue, not that necessarily that phrase, but just the larger issue of what it is about language and coarse language and cursing and those kind of things, where we would point to those things and say, well, those things seem to be prohibited by Scripture.
Right. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. So let's just pull back a little bit.
Hey, I just so you know, though, I will say, let's go JJ, and that means something completely different.
That's not code for anything.
That's not code for anything.
Okay. All right.
I'm rooting for you, man.
All right.
I really am.
All right. That was my next question. I'm relieved that you're able to say that. So Brett, just a few people watching probably have known you, have through our missions trips or your ministry or whatever, but a fair number do not. Take a second and just tell our viewers and our listeners who are you, what's your story, and then go ahead and weave into that. What is Maven? What are you trying to do with Maven?
Yeah. Well, currently I am the founder and president of Maven. We started Maven 4 years ago, and the reason why we started Maven actually goes back much further. I started off in local church ministry as a youth pastor, and I was doing junior high, high school, college ministry, and just, of course, was passionate about discipling young people and really coming alongside families. After about 10 years in the local church, I started working with a ministry called Stand to Reason, which is an apologetics ministry, really trying to help young people really get equipped with the reasons why we think this stuff is actually true, and trying to give them confidence to engage the world, to just secure their own faith, and then also to ultimately share the gospel with people. And then just have seen the changes in the culture that not only the kids that the students I work with are facing, but my own kids. So I have 5 kids, and my primary obligation is to raise and disciple those kids. Like, that's my own youth group right there. And just trying to help them navigate this culture and seeing the different kinds of challenges that they're facing really helped lead us to the point where we said, hey, we need to develop a new organization that will do some good apologetics, but also really, I think, to meet the need of the day, really focus on the larger worldview, the Christian worldview, because oftentimes we talk about things to our students in isolation from the larger picture. And so then it doesn't have quite the coherence. It doesn't make sense. And it doesn't have persuasive power on our young people. And so we just wanted to hit more worldview issues. We wanted to deal with culture a little bit more. We wanted to help families in particular. And so all those reasons went into starting Maven, to really come alongside young people, and then the people who are discipling young people. So that's parents, that's also grandparents, it's youth pastors, it's home educators, it's public school educators, it's everyone who really is a stakeholder in the lives of young people.
Right. Well, I just want to say that having known you for a long time, I appreciate the work that you're doing. I'm really thankful for what Maven is and how you've formed it, and you're leading it, and what you're doing with it. Wanted to give, I might want to circle back to a couple questions about Maven in a bit, but first off, Brett, we've started a Worldview class here at our church, and there are, everybody's unique, but kind of a couple of demographics in the class. About half of our class are high school students, kids age 15 to 17, right around there. And then we've had a bunch of adults sign up for the class as well, and they're coming. It's really a unified group, but coming at life from a couple of different perspectives. And when we introduced the class 3 weeks ago, I asked the class, why did you sign up for this class? And I had 2 or 3 of the adults say, I don't know how to talk about some of the issues of the day, or I know someone who believes something that is just a complete mystery to me. The world is changing really fast in ways that a lot of us couldn't have foreseen. So I wonder if you just take a little time, talk to high school students for me. Would you have 1 or 2 bits of counsel just for a high school student who says, I've trusted Jesus, I love Jesus, I know that I'm a sinner, I know that I need the cross. How do you mentioned worldview, how do I develop that? How can I take ownership of that process, and what should I be doing as a matter of habit or course? What would you say to that student?
Okay, well, let's see. You asked several questions
Right.
there. So let me offer.
You pick whatever question you want.
I'll offer some thoughts on worldview.
Mm-hmm.
I think number one, really understanding what worldview is helps you to understand why it's so important. And so if a worldview is, on a basic definition, it would be your picture of reality. And this is the definition that, a great worldview book is Greg Koukle's book, The Story of Reality. And, it's a picture of reality. So it turns out that Christianity it's not simply a religion. It's not simply a relationship, even though those terms can capture aspects of it. But even more fundamental, Christianity is a worldview. It is a description and depiction of all of reality. And so it should therefore inform every aspect of reality. In fact, the analogy I like to use, and I think Kunkle also uses this in his book, is that the analogy of puzzle pieces. And if we were to say that all of the beliefs and ideas in our minds were kind of represented as different puzzle pieces, and we were to dump the contents of our mind out onto a table, it would just be a scattered mess for most Americans and most Christian Americans. We have all of these ideas and beliefs, these little pieces of the puzzle, but they're completely disconnected. And so this is why you can talk to many Americans, and in one sentence, they're saying one thing. In the very next sentence, they could be contradicting what they just said and not even realize it. And so what worldview helps us do is it helps us to take those puzzle pieces and begin to fit them together into a coherent whole, a coherent picture that makes sense of the world around us, that makes sense of reality and explains things and explains even the craziness that we see around us. And of course, a worldview that has what we call explanatory power, or going back to that puzzle analogy, that is a kind of a holistic picture that offers an explanation for all these things. If it has that kind of explanatory power to explain all the reality we see, then that commends its truthfulness to us, that it is the accurate picture of reality. And so that's what a worldview can really help do, is make sense of the world around us. And this is why we need to think worldviewishly. There was another question you asked in there, and I can't remember what it is. And I was going to say something really important and wise. And but there was, I think it was did you say, ask me the second or third question in that string of questions?
Yeah, I was kind of winging it a little bit, but I was leading up to, we offered a class. Some of the adults in the room said that they took the class because they know somebody who just believes something that baffles them. And they're like, how do I even start a conversation with somebody? How do I make sense of I know a 14-year-old girl who thinks she's a boy, or whatever the case may be. And a number of people were like, there's just things happening in the world that do not do not compute based on my understanding of the world. And I'm like, I get that. But that was why they wanted to take the class, was to be able to understand and then minister to people who, clearly have, one way to put it, gone off the rails or just believe things that are nonsensical or bizarre from our perspective.
Yeah, that kind of reminded me of what the other question I would answer was like, how do I develop my worldview?
Oh, sure.
And so I would say a couple of things. Number one, the way I like to organize the questions that worldview should address, at least the most significant questions, would be 5 questions. It would be the question of origin, and that's answering the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Where did everything come from? What's the explanation for the reality we see? Where does it all come from? And that origin question is absolutely vital. And it leads us to the following questions. And there's going to be actually a flow of answers that come from that, your answer to that first question. But then the second question would be the question of identity. What does it mean to be human? What am I, or who am I? The third question would be meaning. What's the purpose of all of this? Why am I here? Is there any objective, transcendent purpose? Do we just get to make this up for ourselves as we go? The fourth question is the question of morality. Is there a particular way to live? Should I live? Is there right and wrong? Those kind of questions. And then there's the question of destiny. What happens after I die? And any worldview that's going to adequately explain the reality of around us is going to need to address those 5 key questions. And so I would say for people to start there and answer those questions, and don't settle for cliches or shallow answers. So when we answer the question, where do we come from? It's not enough to simply say, well, God made us. Like, that's the very start, but we've got to say a whole lot more. We need to know, okay, who is this God? What is he like? What are his attributes and characteristics? And explore that question in much greater detail. And when we answer those 5 key questions, what those do is those provide a general framework for all of the other issues that we're going to deal with. And they're going to help make sense of all of the issues kind of in that picture. I mean, think about when you start a puzzle, what pieces do you start with? You start with the edges and the corners. Now, why do we do that? Because when we can lay out the edges and the corners, it creates a frame that will then make more sense of the smaller pieces inside. And so think about the 2 ways to really derail a puzzle is, number one, by having missing pieces. And so worldview thinking helps you to see, am I missing some significant pieces that help explain the nature of reality? Maybe that's why some of us are so puzzled by certain things, because we haven't developed a robust Christian worldview that really makes sense of what we see around us. But then secondly, another way you can derail putting a puzzle together is by having the wrong pieces. If you've ever mixed up puzzle pieces in different puzzle boxes, that can just be maddening, because you get the wrong piece in a puzzle. You're trying to figure out, where does this go? And it doesn't fit anywhere. And then you come to realize, oh, this is the wrong piece. So what do? You remove it from that puzzle. Well, I think there are a lot of Christians who have ideas that aren't actually consistent with the Christian worldview, the Christian picture of reality, and don't even realize it because they've never thought carefully through their worldview. And so that's number one. By answering those 5 key questions and continuing to explore the depth of answers to those questions, we can start making much more sense of the world around us. And number 2, the study of Scripture is absolutely vital. That is where we are going to get lots of our information about the Christian worldview, those puzzle pieces. And so the study of Scripture, learning how to study it, spending the necessary time studying it, will help put those pieces together. And then I would say thirdly, learning from other Christian thinkers who are good Christian thinkers, who have done this well, who can help us put those pieces together. So I already mentioned Greg Koukle's book, The Story of Reality. That's, I think, a go-to book on worldview. James Sire has a great book called The Universe Next Door, which goes in more in depth on these things. Glenn Sunshine has a nice short book called Portals. There's all kinds of resources out there to help us develop a robust picture of reality.
All right, that's really helpful. I'm sure that the people in my class, those listening, are gonna, I think, run for some of those resources. And I do think that puzzle analogy is really helpful. It can, for those of us struggling with how do I make sense of how bizarre this world is, that puzzle analogy is going to be really helpful, I think. So I appreciate that. Brett, I know that that Maven has a conference coming up, and I've kind of glanced at who some of the speakers are and some of the topics. I wondered if you could tell us, how do you go about when you prep a conference like this? I'm sure it's a ton of work and thought goes into it. How do you decide like what topics you want to hit a given year? I know it changes from year to year. How'd you go about that? And mention, if somebody's interested in your conference, how could they access it? Go ahead and promote the conference as well.
Yeah, well, you can get all the information about the conference at mavenconferences.com. And in fact, I would argue this is a conference that is worth traveling to. So if you're in Nebraska and you'd actually like to escape the cold, harsh, bleak winter.
It was like it was 4 below this morning. So you're selling it at just the right time.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah, I'd rather die than be in that. No, but come out to Southern California for a little reprieve and also some real encouragement and motivation. The conference is a Friday night, Saturday, but we actually have
It's in. Sorry to interrupt you. It's in March, right?
March 18th and 19th.
Okay.
But we have a free pre-conference event on March the 17th. So it really can be a kind of a 3-day, 4-day little getaway to really soak in the Christian worldview. And I think that what I think about when we put together the themes for these conferences are two things that we're trying to balance out. Number one are the timeless, universal truths of the Christian worldview. And so there are times when we want to maybe, focus on those things that are unchanging for the last 2,000 years. These are the truths of Christianity that we build our lives on. And but then at the same time, we know that we live in a particular cultural moment and we have unique challenges, and we were born at this time in this place. And so we've got unique challenges that we need to take those universal truths of the Christian faith and figure out, how do we navigate these unique challenges? So a lot of the stuff is, dealing with the contemporary challenges we face, but drawing on the rich truth of Christian history and the Christian scriptures and the teaching of the Christian faith for the last 2,000 years. So this year, we're looking at the theme of in but not of. How are we as Christians to kind of balance this out? Like, I mean, what does it mean to have to navigate this world, to live in it, but not to absorb the thought forms and the ideas and the false ideas of this culture? That's the whole idea. And so just looked at, hey, in my estimation, what are issues that are front and center for Christians in American culture that we're just not, that we need help thinking through, but they're vital issues. And so that's why we came up with the issues we did. Number one, we're going to be dealing with the issue of freedom. I mean, over the last 2 years, it has been a bit tragic to see and to hear Christians talking about freedom. I hear sometimes pastors on one end of the spectrum chastising their congregants, their congregations, their sheep for appealing to their freedoms as U.S. citizens and equating that with selfishness. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who say, hey, I am free and autonomous and no one can tell me what to do. And Christians just don't have a rich, robust biblical view of freedom. And that freedom isn't just simply, my freedom from something, but it's freedom for something in a biblical view. And so we want to help Christians really navigate that one and have a proper view, because that's absolutely vital to function well as an American citizen. And then we're going to hit on marriage and the family. Katie Faust is speaking, and I love Katie. She's kind of a fireball. She's courageous. She speaks the truth passionately. And she's going to talk about our changing views of marriage and the family and how fundamental that is, and how, we have to be careful as Christians that we don't go along with these destructive ideas in the culture, and that God has a particular design for the family. And when we move away from that, we're going to see resulting brokenness all around the culture. And that's exactly what happens. And then we'll be hitting the issue of racial strife with Thaddeus Williams, who I think has written the book to get on that issue. And that's, oh my gosh. I'll say it's the book, and I can't remember the title.
I actually just ordered it, and I'm blanking on the title as well.
Confronting Injustice Without Compromising the Truth.
There you go.
And,
okay.
He and Monique Dasson, who's the founder of the Center for, there's another, excuse me, there's another name. It's the Center for Biblical. Oh my gosh.
We'll find it and we'll drop a graphic in when we release
there
this.
You go.
So it's been a rough couple of years for all of us, so don't worry about it.
But Monique Dasson has this great organization where they're addressing the issues of racial reconciliation and racial strife, and thinking about these things from a Christian worldview, and not absorbing the world's ideas on this. And I think her organization is called the Center for Biblical Unity. That's what it is. So,
gotcha. Okay.
So anyway, that's kind of how we think through some of the themes. Last year, we wanted to get parents and adults and leaders some really good apologetics to equip their kids with, and so we had the theme of answering kids' tough questions. And the year before that, technology is a constant challenge, and so our theme was really navigating a world of screens. So we're trying to say, hey, here's the biblical worldview that's true. It's objectively true. It's universally true. Okay, how does it now intersect with contemporary culture and the challenges I'm facing day in and day out? And because this is God's universe, his truth will be relevant, and we'll find touch points all throughout the culture, and we'll see how it actually makes sense of every cultural situation we find ourselves in.
Well, that's really cool. I sure hope that some of our people can make the trip out. Brett, if somebody,
let me just say this, JJ, if you can't make the trip out, we actually are live streaming the conference as well.
Okay.
People sign up for the live stream.
Okay, that's exactly what I was about to ask. If somebody's stuck here in the snow, can they still participate? So that's really cool. We'll find a way to get a link to our people here. Brett, if you have just a little bit more time, I got a couple of other questions. Or Paul, do you have anything you want to ask Brett at this point?
I don't.
You don't?
Guys
Okay.
are just up here on the smartness scale. And I'm just enjoying all this wisdom.
All right. Good to know.
Hey, Paul, say a little bit more about that, could you?
You guys are so amazing.
You need some.
I love you both so much.
All right. You can use that in any promotional material you want. So yeah, Paul's a good judge of character, and so you can use that praise however you need to promote what you're doing, Brett. But
okay, yeah, I'll take that clip of Paul. You guys are so smart, and I love you so much, and we'll just play that on as many channels.
Just put it on loop. Okay. Hey, Brett, I think it was 2004 I first got to know you. And you've touched on this some, and we've referenced it some, but the types of things that we need to be addressing, how much have you had to change either the topics that you want to talk about or the way you talk about them? How has that changed for you over the last 15, 20, 25 years?
That's a good question. I think I think that I'm doing a little less of your traditional apologetic content. The questions have definitely shifted, and so it's not so much your philosophy of religion stuff or your evidential stuff as much. We're still doing some of that, and we need to keep doing that, even though maybe the culture is not asking questions about what maybe it's biblical reliability or God's existence as much. We still need to address those things. I think there's huge value in laying a foundation for young people to have confidence in what they believe and why they believe it. But we've certainly seen a shift in the challenges confronting young people's faith. And a lot of them, I think, they're much more worldviewish. And so, for instance, questions on sexuality have become prominent. And so there's this alternative vision of human sexuality that's being offered by the culture. And it involves every letter of the acronym, right? LGBTQ+. And so those questions are front and center for a lot of young people. The culture is just constantly pounding away with those questions. Young people now are constantly faced with those issues from their peers, and not just the changing views, but the changing lifestyles. So it's almost like every high school or a junior higher now knows someone personally who is transitioning, right? Or who identifies as gay or lesbian or bisexual or non-binary or asexual or whatever it might be. And so this is not a kind of your classical. I mean, this is definitely a human issue for throughout all of human history, the issue of sexuality. But these kind of issues, there's some new stuff coming up here. And what it does is it's not a kind of a direct attack on the truthfulness of Christianity, say like an atheist professor who says there is no God and there's no evidence for God and the Bible is unreliable and miracles are a myth and that kind of thing. And this one can be a little more insidious, and what it does, I think, is it works a little more slowly to chip away at a young person's faith. So they go to church or they hear from mom and dad, hey, God made the family, it's male and female, and no sex outside of marriage, and this is the view, right? Bible says so. And then they're constantly hearing from the culture all of these other issues. And what it does is because we don't give them a good worldview on this that helps explain why this makes sense and how this actually leads to human flourishing, well, then all of these other voices that are constantly speaking at them constantly chip away at that. And what happens is they have these two alternative visions, the one they're getting at church or at home, the other one they're getting at school or in the media or in pop culture or on social media. And then eventually this one just starts to lose its plausibility. The Christian view starts to lose its plausibility. Like, gosh, that just seems outdated. This is certainly the minority view. Everyone else is saying this. And that's how I think it kind of maybe is a little more insidious and undermining the Christian worldview of young people. And so I think that's been a big shift, is that we're having to deal with issues, more cultural and worldview issues. Now, doesn't mean we get away from those foundational things. We've got to do that as well. But we also need to address the issues of the day.
Yeah, and that corresponds. When we started the class, I gave our students, the high school students and the adults, a survey of every possible question I could think of, and I said, "What do you guys build the curriculum? What do you want to learn about?" And it surprised me a bit that, like you said, some of those classical questions about does God exist, there wasn't nearly as much enthusiasm for those as some of what you just described. What do we do about the transgender issue and some of these other types of things? And so that's consistent with what I've seen, and even what the students that are the people taking our class have asked for. So that sure makes sense. I don't know how much more time you have. You mentioned, was it last year, 2 years ago, your conference theme was a world of screens, or what? I didn't get that quite right.
Yeah, it was navigating a world of screens.
Yeah. Do you have a minute just to, I know for me, some of the challenges like that I face as a dad is, I remember the kind of stuff that was on TV when I was a kid, and and then you get busy, life goes on, and you assume that, well, what's on network TV is roughly equivalent to what was, or the stuff that I might look at on YouTube is similar to what a 10-year-old or 15-year-old might look at. How do you, kind of a loaded question, but do you have ways of getting people's attention to say that the content of these media has changed dramatically, and there's just, in my opinion, a heightened need to really be aware of what's coming through those screens. How do you, if a parent is maybe casual or not, just assumes that it's probably fine, do you have a way to get somebody's attention and say, this really matters, this really is significant, how you address what's coming through the screen?
I'm not sure I have a way to really capture someone's attention. Sometimes I'll point to the data.
Mm-hmm.
The facts are young people have epidemic rates of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, attempted suicides. If that doesn't wake you up, I'm not sure what will. It's a problem, actually, I think that most people are pretty aware of when it comes to screens. So if you say, hey, do you think screens are a problem? Universally, all parents are going to say yes. Sure. Most students recognize it as a problem, even if they don't necessarily want to do something about it. Yeah. They recognize in their candid moments, they're going to tell you they're on their screens way more than they think they should be. So I think with that issue, we may not have to do a whole lot of waking up people on this, but I think what we need to do is expand our categories when we're talking about this issue. So there's certainly the issue of content, right? And what content is coming through those devices. But that's just one category that we need to be concerned about. And, we often think about, the moral and the immoral. And so the content in this movie is moral and this content's immoral. And again, that's an important category, but we need to expand our categories, because I think what we're finding with digital technologies, it's not just the content, it's the very nature of the device itself and the technology itself and the impact it has on us just by our very use of that thing. So young people have heard over and over again, hey, too much time is bad, this is good, don't do this. Mm-hmm. And so I as I've talked to them, I've sensed that they tune some of that out when that's all they hear, bad, 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 bad. But when I talk to them about how, this little device right here, this smartphone, is not neutral, but just by your very use of this thing, you give it power to shape you in various ways. Now, that doesn't make it wrong or right. It doesn't make it immoral or moral to use it. But what you have to consider is that this thing is constantly nudging you in a direction. It's constantly moving you. That's what I mean when I say it's not neutral. A car has a drive gear. It has a reverse gear, and then it has a neutral. And then when it's in neutral, it doesn't go forward or backward. It stays the same. These devices don't have neutral. They're always pushing us, moving us, nudging us in different directions. And we don't think about that aspect. So they can actually nudge us in directions that are not good for our souls. So for instance, if I were to illustrate this, I'd just say, hey, compare how we used to primarily watch movies 30 years ago with how we primarily watch movies today. And, we would go to a theater. So you would call up some friends, you'd gather together, you might drive together, go to a theater, watch a movie on this very public venue with other people in the crowd. You'd watch it together. You'd have the shared experience. Maybe you go get dinner afterwards or ice cream, and then you go home. And it was a much more social event, and it was a public event. Whereas now you put on a pair of headphones, you pull out your smartphone or your tablet or your laptop, and we often watch movies and shows in isolation, in private, where no one else is there. And so, number one, not only does that remove any kind of accountability or sense of public shame for watching something maybe I shouldn't be watching, you lose that accountability, but you're also isolated. And we end up isolating ourselves. Instead of having a movie where we watch it together and there's a shared experience, now I'm just watching this in isolation. And our devices nudge us towards isolation. And then we wonder why we're so lonely and why we don't have deep, rich friendships, and why relationally we're just absolutely starving to death, and why then there's greater rates of anxiety and depression, because we weren't designed to live that way. We weren't designed to live in isolation. And so I think we need to be talking about our technology in those kinds of ways to really help people see that even if you're not doing something wrong or watching content that's morally wrong on the screen, that screen can still be shaping you. That smartphone can still be shaping you. And we need to be thinking through the nature of technology a lot more. Just a really good book for people to read on this is Andy Crouch's book, The Tech Wise Family. Really good book. Kathy Cook, Koch, she's got a book called Teens and Screens, which is really good. And there's a lot of other good ones out there as well. But we need to constantly be reading, thinking about technology from a Christian worldview.
Mm-hmm. So if I hear you, you mentioned the 5 components of worldview, and I mentioned the concern about screens. We don't start with talking about screens. We start with that question of origin and identity. What am I created for?
Yeah.
And understand the target of, I want to be moving in a particular direction. I'm created for something. And then I start asking questions about screen. Is this screen moving me in that direction, and plug it into the bigger picture of worldview? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
You've got that framework,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly the questions of origin and identity are so vital to this issue of technology, because our identity tells us, number one, that we're made in God's image. So we're these amazing creatures, and we actually end up being sub-creators under the great creator. So made in God's image with these amazing creative abilities. We have rational minds, and we love to build stuff. In fact, this is part of the cultural mandate and the commands that God gives, the first commands that he gives to Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Be fruitful and multiply, but also subdue the earth and rule over it. And so as image bearers, we take the natural resources of this world and we make things and we build culture. And so technology is actually this amazing thing that points to the fact that we're made in God's image. And so this is why we can't just condemn it wholesale and say, well, it's all bad. Because no, there's actually a good part to it. And human beings can do all kinds of noble and wonderful things through technology. But then the second aspect of our identity is that we're fallen, and we're broken, and we're rebellious, and we're capable of all kinds of evil and harm. And so we can take something that's good, like technology, and just take it in the wrong direction. And so those two insights, the creation count, the cultural mandate, help us to start kind of framing this area of technology and help us to really develop a theology of technology. And then from there, we then are able to make sense of this particular issue of technology.
Hey, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
I was
Paul.
going to say, when something else to think about with technology is we can normalize or make sense or justify anything in our heads. and I'm really great at that. And I was even better at it when I was a kid. Because if it makes sense, you can rationalize and go down this rabbit trail if it's okay now. But then you combine that with every single TV show and movie. It seems like no matter how innocent it looks, movie, just anything, it all has all of that embedded in it. So it just normalizes it. So you have it thrown in your face without even thinking about it, because a normal TV show has all that stuff in it. Combine that with justifying it in your head. So it makes it normal, and you just think that, oh, it's normal now and it's okay. Then it really goes to what you were saying, Brett, about how is that device leading you in what direction? Because without you thinking about, hey, this is what I'm getting normalized in my brain, it's leading you down that path. And it's hard to think in that deep into it, I guess.
Yeah, no, this is where I think what you're saying is just absolutely consistent with the Christian worldview. Romans, 1 Verse 18 says that we suppress the truth in unrighteousness, and so this is where the rationalization comes in. We will deny true things. We will deny our Creator. We'll suppress the truth in our sin. And so this has to guide us. This has to be one of our guiding principles as we deal with technology, knowing that I have this propensity to want to suppress the truth in my sin. I am tempted by, these kinds of things, these devices, and they can appeal to the fallen aspects of my human nature. And so we, those kind of insights we bring to bear on how we use this and approach this thing. And then as as human beings who build culture then turns around and it shapes us. And one of the most powerful ways it shapes us is simply by presenting to us that which is normal or should be normal. And so everyone has one of these things and everyone's on their devices all the time. And so it just becomes normalized, and we are just taken down kind of the river's current with everything. And so as followers of Christ, this is where we need to think about being in the world, but not of the world.
Right.
We may constantly find ourselves at odds with a fallen, broken world. And that shouldn't surprise us, because that's part of our worldview and what it tells us about the nature of reality.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea that, to follow Christ will require swimming upstream, living differently, thinking differently. That's a hard challenge, but in the end, it's good and rewarding to follow Christ that way. If we need to wind it up a bit, Brett, but if what you just said about screens or technology, is the content of that conference available? If somebody is like, man, I really want to go deeper with that, is that something somebody could access?
Yeah, if you go to our website, maventruth.com, and you go to our videos, we have a page that has videos that are available for purchase from different conferences and different some curriculums that we've put together, just resources for people to access. So they can find that at maventruth.com.
Perfect. If what you've said, Brett, if somebody's like, I want to connect with this guy's ministry, how can people, Twitter, whatever, how do people get in touch with you? How do they follow your ministry?
Well, I would encourage people to go to our home page, maventruth.com, scroll to the bottom. There's a place to put your first name, last name, email address, and get on our email list, where no one's censoring our emails, no one's able to suppress what we send out, and we try to put out content to help equip parents and families and young people, and let you know about great events that'll equip you. So that would be a first step, I'd say. Then we're on different social media channels. So we have a great resource for parents in particular and adults in general, and that would be our Maven Parent Podcast that my wife and I lead, and we release an episode every week. And what we're trying to do in that podcast is say, hey, let's take the Christian worldview. Let's let it frame all of reality for us, and even all the specific issues that come with raising kids and discipling kids. And then let's figure out how do we let our Christian worldview lead us. So we have a Maven Parent Podcast that we do every week, and that's a great resource. You can get that on most podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or a couple others, or we actually video it, and you can watch it on our YouTube channel. And so if you just go to Maven Truth on YouTube, you'll find our YouTube channel, and that's another way to connect with us.
Okay. Well, I bet people are going to seek that out. I do need to know, if somebody comes to me and says, I've only got time this week for one podcast, should they go for the Maven Parent Podcast or the 28 Minutes of Sanity podcast? How would you counsel them?
Oh, clearly I would say, hey, go and listen to the Maven Parent Podcast.
Oh, wait a minute. No.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess.
Sorry, did I throw you with that answer, JJ?
Man, I don't know where to go from here. That stings a little bit. But actually, I would, in all truth, I'd probably give him the same advice. But All right. We need to wind it up. Brett, I bet you've got stuff to do. So, Brett, as a friend, I really do appreciate your time today. We appreciate your ministry so much. So many people at Heartland have been impacted by you personally. And so thanks for being faithful to do what you do for God's glory, to train kids. Really appreciate your time today. So thanks a lot for joining us. This is the 28 Minutes of Sanity podcast. Send us a note, 28minutesofsanity@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter @28min of sanity. And thanks for your time today. We'll see you.